The All-Star break is now finally upon us, and the New York Knicks right now have pretty much the same record as they did at this point last season, but a lot of different things have happened this season, and we're going to dive into all that stuff and give some grades on what we think about this first half of the season for the Knicks and really what is ahead for them. I'm your host, Dylan Backer. That is my co-host, Johnny. We're going to jump right into all of that stuff right now. So with the first half pretty much now behind us, the New York Knicks are sitting right now, as the time we're recording this, they are the third seed, but they very well could be the second seed by the end of tonight, depending on the outcome against the Philadelphia 76ers. But that is besides the point. Regardless of that outcome, my opinions about this team are not going to change, and that's why we are on here today to talk about really just give an assessment about this team and kind of what really lies ahead for them. This is Mike Brown's first year, obviously, as head coach, and while they have a very good record, there have been some very obvious ups and downs. They started off the year really great, 23-9, winning the NBA Cup. Then they had that drastic fall off. I mean, a 2-9 stretch. They didn't even have a stretch that bad under Tom Thibodeau. That was one of the more drastic midseason slides I had ever seen this team have. But then they bounced back, and now they're entering the All-Star break on a relatively high note. Yes, they dropped a really bad game to the Pacers, which we will briefly talk about. But other than that, they have won 9 of their last 11 games at the time of this recording. They'll enter the All-Star break either 9-3 in the last 12 or 10-2, depending on the Philly game. But besides that point, they are still entering the All-Star break relatively on a high note. And really what I think is most important before I pass it off to you, Johnny, is I think the biggest thing we need to discuss really is health. I think health is the most important thing for this team moving forward. And I think really when we look at this team, what lies ahead with them, I think the biggest and most important thing for them coming into the All-Star break is that they need to get healthier. And Johnny, I want to pass it off to you and kind of, let you open up with some of your thoughts on this first half of the season or 2/3 of the season, really, if you want to call it that, and kind of really what you noticed about this team the most and what you think they need to address heading into the final stretch of the year.
Yeah, talking about injuries, I think the All-Star break couldn't have came at a better time. OG is obviously out with the weird injury. Josh Hart's ankle is a little bit funny. Jalen Brunson's probably not fully fit. So this team really needs a break. So the All-Star break, excuse me, couldn't have came at a better time. And overall, if I had to grade this, this portion of the season before the All-Star break, I'm in between like a B and a B plus, around that range. We've definitely dealt with more injuries than we did last year before the All-Star break. I think the offense this year compared to the Knicks under Tom Thibodeau last season is definitely more fluid. I think the floor is probably higher and the ceiling is definitely higher. I like what Mike Brown has implemented with this offense, and the defense, as we've seen in the past 10 or so games, has looked a lot better. Now, last night, or whenever you're watching this, the big loss against the Indiana Pacers, that was not good at all. The defense looked horrible. The late game execution has been a little bit of a problem this season, which is not great. We didn't score in overtime for a couple minutes, and against a team that is, obviously tanking and has one of the worst records in the league, that cannot happen. It seems like the Pacers always get up to play for the Knicks, and sometimes we don't show up as well. So that was definitely disappointing. But as you said, we're going into the All-Star break on somewhat of a high note, so that's good to see. But overall, I definitely like, to an extent, what Mike Brown has brought to this New York Knicks squad. I think the offense will definitely be better in the long run, and we'll have to see about the defense, because obviously some players on this roster, Jalen Brunson, Karl Anthony Towns, they have their defensive flaws, and we'll see if they're able to sustain, a better defensive team, you could say, for the long run, or are they going to fall back into that poor defensive team like we've seen for the past couple weeks before this really good stretch. So overall, I'd give it a B to maybe B plus. We're definitely not in that A range. Last year at this time, we did have a better record by 2 or so games, but I'm not going to really harp on that too much. I see a lot of Knicks comparing this season to last season, and I'm not really going to do that all too much. This season, there's been a lot more injuries. The schedule hasn't been as friendly, but overall, I like where this roster is now compared to last year. So you could say that's a good sign.
Yeah, and something I want to touch on too, I'll give my grade straight up and then provide the explanation. I'll be a little nicer. I think this is a B plus. I think it's worthy of even close to an A minus, and the reason I am going to put it that high is because this is the first year of a completely different system for this Knicks team, and most of this roster is returning from Tom Thibodeau's team. So they have to completely, learn a different play style. And I think growing pains were to be expected. I think they just came at a much later time. I think we expected the growing pains to be relatively at the start of the year, but they kind of came at the midway point, which is fine. It was bound to happen at some point. I'm glad they were able to at least rebound from that awful 2-9 stretch, which, again, that's still a concerning stretch that it was able to happen that badly and that quickly, but at least they bounced back from it. Now, the other concern, though, I do have is that they were able to go on an 8-game winning streak and gain virtually no ground in the standings. In fact, they are still the 3rd seed at the time of recording this, when they could easily have been the 1 seed if they just stayed afloat. So that's one thing right there. The East is a lot more competitive than I think a lot of us envisioned it was going to be coming into the season. I don't think a lot of us had the Raptors being in playoff position right now. I don't think even many of us had the Boston Celtics being as good as they are right now. You know what I mean? So you have a lot of different teams right now that are pretty much in a very tight race. It's pretty much the Pistons at the 1 seed with a bunch of games separating them, and then the 2 through 6 seed is separated by like 3 games, not even. So the season is going to matter. It's no longer at that point of, oh, it's just February, we'll be all right in April and May. No, every game is going to matter at this point. These games are going to matter for seeding and all that stuff, which is why dropping that game to the Pacers really sucks, because I really hope that we don't end up having to look back on that game come April and say, man, I wish we didn't drop that game, because then we could be the 2nd seed. You could even say the same thing about losing that Sacramento Kings game back in January and the Dallas Mavericks game as well. They've had a couple really bad losses, albeit a couple really good wins as well, such as beating the Boston Celtics twice, beating the Cleveland Cavaliers twice. They have a lot of good wins under their belt. So it's a weird season to really assess, because I see a lot of good things and also some bad things. And, you pointed out some of those things, such as the defense. I think the defense is the one thing that needs to be sustainable the rest of the way. Obviously, the Pacers game defense was awful. I mean, straight up awful. The Pacers were 30th in defense and offensive rating, entering that game, and the Knicks let them light them up. Now, I don't know if that's just because the Pacers were playing with a little extra fire because of who they were playing and what building they were stepping in, but that can't happen on a nightly basis. Those were the same issues that were causing the Knicks to lose all those games back in January. Now, I'll give them a little grace because they didn't have OG Anunoby, so maybe the defense will look a little better. They also didn't have Mitchell Robinson or Deuce McBride as well, I should also point out. So maybe the defense will look a little better with at least Mitch and OG back on the floor. Obviously, we won't have Deuce McBride for a little longer than that, so we're not even really going to talk about him like that. But as far as everything else, though, the offense has definitely taken a step forward. And I must, really talk about that, because last year, the offense we saw at times, it stalled. It stalled throughout the year. There was a lot of times where it was almost too dependent on Jalen Brunson. Last night was kind of reminiscent of that dependence on Jalen Brunson a little bit, but I'm hopeful that that's just a one-off thing, because at the end of the day, do I think Brunson threw that game against the Pacers away? Yeah, I do. But he did also have 40 points, and also it's Jalen Brunson. You do want him taking those shots down the stretch. It's just you kind of wish maybe once in a while he did, pass the ball, maybe get a different teammate involved. But it happens. You move on. You flush it down the toilet. You move on. And hopefully, like we've been talking about, this All-Star break will give him a really good chance to really just recoup and get healthier, because they've dealt with injuries all year, really. I mean, they've only had like a game fully healthy roster. So obviously that's not ideal, but the fact that the Knicks are in the position they are in right now, despite that, is still a good thing. I'm not going to come on here and be too critical about this Knicks team. I do think that in retrospect, they are having a very good season, but I do think it could be better. I think there are definitely things that they can improve on, which I do hope will improve as the season goes on and as we reach the final stretch of the year and into the playoffs as well. But the seeding is going to matter, and I need to emphasize that, because there's a lot of people who kind of think the seeding doesn't really matter because of how last year's playoffs unfolded. It's just not true, guys. The seeding is going to matter. The Knicks need to be able to have home court advantage, because they have really struggled on the road. And that is one thing, 2/3 of the way through the year, or whatever you want to call it, because they have really been bad on who has an under 500 record on the road. Now, albeit they have been amazing at home. They're 21-7 at home, so they've been great at Madison Square Garden, but every time they go somewhere else, it has been rough. So they need to have home court advantage in the playoffs in order to have a successful run and possibly be able to replicate what they did during last year's playoffs and possibly make it even further and get to the NBA Finals. But I don't want to take up too much time on my point. I do want to pass it back to you, Johnny, and kind of, ask you about this next point that I want to get into. Jose Alvarado, we just brought him in. Obviously, I saw a quote from SNY's Ian Begley earlier today, and he said, he took this quote from Alvarado. He said that he's going to stay back during the All-Star break at the Knicks facility, get some more reps in, kind of learn the team a little bit. What do you expect from Alvarado in this final stretch of the year? Do you think Mike Brown is going to be able to deploy him in situations that he's going to really be useful in? Because I really want to see what impact he provides, and I do think he will help make us a much better team down the final stretch. But I want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think Jose Alvarado is going to bring what we've already seen. I mean, last night he was diving across the hardwood to get loose balls. He's going to be that handsy defender. He's going to pick up steals. He'll get the bucket every now and then. He's just going to bring an impact off the bench. He's going to come into the game and provide a spark that this bench needs. He's a really good perimeter defender, something we kind of lack. Obviously, he's a little bit undersized, but he's going to bring that handsy defense that kind of just annoys the opponent. I mentioned this on the podcast a few times. He's going to be almost that TJ McConnell type player once it comes to the playoffs. He's going to come in, he's going to annoy you a little bit if you're the opponent, and he's just going to make an impact. He'll score, he'll play good defense, he'll make for your team. So I'm obviously glad he's staying at the facility, getting some reps in with this team. And I think this was a great move for the Knicks. Obviously, we talked about the trade numerous times, but yeah, I'm really excited to see what he can bring, this final stretch of the season as he gets more comfortable with this roster. And, we gave up practically nothing for him. So this is going to turn out to be a really solid deal for us, in my opinion. And I think Jose Alvarado is going to be a guy where he's going to shine in the biggest and brightest moments. I think, when it comes time to the playoffs, Jose Alvarado is going to be a guy that's going to come in and could possibly, change the tide and win you maybe a playoff game with the impact he's going to bring. He's going to be that energy guy. I mean, can you just imagine MSG playoffs? Jose Alvarado comes into the game diving for loose balls. That's going to be awesome. I can't wait to see that. So as we've seen in, the previous playoffs, you need guys who come in and making a real impact. You need guys who are going to bring energy, bring that dog mentality. As we saw with the Pacers last year, I mean, this team was very, very close to winning an NBA Finals because they had guys who can just come on and make an impact. And I think Jose Alvarado is absolutely that guy. So I'm very excited to see what he's going to bring to this Knicks roster towards the end of the year. And I think he's going to do a very good job in bringing that spark that this bench really needs.
Yeah, I agree. I expect Alvarado to not only do that stuff already as he comes in, but I expect that stuff to improve as he really understands the system a little bit more, gets used to playing with his teammates and stuff like that. He's only been with the Knicks for 2 games as far as we're recording this, and it'll be 3 games when the All-Star break hits. So he will have basically like no time to have understood everything, and so fans need to be a little patient with him. I'm sure they will be, but they need to be a little patient. Wait until at least after the All-Star break when he has more practices in with the guys and he understands the system a little bit, gets to know Mike Brown a little bit more, all that stuff. Because once he understands everything, I expect the impact to be tenfold. I expect him to be basically replaced. Right, is a better basketball player than him, but he can provide the same stuff that Deuce was giving us, the shooting, the defense, and Alvarado can play make. He's a guy who can handle the ball, be a secondary ball handler behind Jalen Brunson, which I think is very important, and he can also run the backcourt with Brunson, which I also think is important. We saw Mike Brown kind of likes to do that. He likes to have lineups with 2 point guards out there. We saw a lot of Tyler Kolek and Brunson earlier on this season. I expect to see a lot of Alvarado and Brunson together as well, just to kind of complement each other and kind of provide some backcourt spark, right? So that's what I'm really looking forward to. But moving on to the next thing I really want to talk about before we do wrap this up, the third and final point, is kind of just what's ahead and really the playoffs here, because we know the Knicks are probably good enough to make the postseason outright and avoid the play-in, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we don't undergo another 2-9 stretch to where we have to worry about the play-in. But I don't think we'll be in a position with that. But I do think we need to be in a high seed. I do think we can't just settle for like the 5th or the 6th seed. I think they need to at least target the top 3 seed in the Eastern Conference, not only to um, fulfill kind of that expectation that was placed on them at the start of the year, but just for the sake of home court with the way they've struggled on the road this year. You really don't want to be in a situation if you're this Knicks team to where you're playing more games on the road. You don't want to be in a spot where, say, you're going to Philadelphia and you have to play more games on the road in Philadelphia, where Philadelphia seems to. I mean, I know we do pretty well against Philadelphia usually, but still, you don't want to deal with having to go on the road in the postseason. That is a completely different animal, and the Knicks have shown in years that they can handle being at home at Madison Square Garden and really take games over there, and have the crowd take it over as well, and really get into the opponent's head. So, Johnny, what I want to kind of ask you is really, you can predict where you think they'll finish. If you ask me, I think they're going to finish as the second seed. I do think they'll find a way to get back to that spot and end up holding on to it. But at the same time, if they end up as the third seed, I won't be too surprised. But either way, I do want to ask you just really, you know, looking ahead towards the playoffs, really, what is like the biggest thing you want to see improve? Because if you ask me, I think it's really the ball movement. I think I want to see everybody continue to get involved as the season goes on. Get everybody involved. Get everyone some good shots up. Everyone get reps in, so that everyone for the playoffs is ready to go. And I want to get your input on that. So go for it.
Yeah, so after the All-Star break, this team needs to be locked in. They need to be locked in. They need to get healthy and be locked in because there is a world where this team could somehow fall to the 6th seed and then you're screwed. At that point, you're going to have tough matchup after tough matchup after tough matchup, and that's a really bad sight that I don't want to see. So, now if I had to make a prediction, I do think this team will end up with the 2nd seed, which is huge. Wouldn't be surprised with the 3rd seed at all at this point, but they need to be locked in because this conference is dangerous. You can't fall the 6th seed. I mean, heading into the playoffs, they're going to be pesky teams that are going to put up serious challenges. Cleveland is not a team you really want to play. I know they haven't had the playoff success in recent years that they expect, but I mean, I don't want to see Cleveland in the first round. That would be dangerous. Or even Orlando. They're very physical. They have won a few games against us recently. I don't want to see Orlando, Boston, and then even Detroit in the conference final or whatever. So I think it's very important that this Knicks team is locked in, gets healthy, and finishes with that 2nd seed. This team seems to play much better. It doesn't seem to play much better. They do play much better at Madison Square Garden. I think once that playoff, atmosphere comes around, I think this team plays better in that MSG atmosphere. So I think it's very crucial that we finish as the 2nd seed. And yeah, because as I said, there's a lot of dangerous teams that you don't really want to go to Cleveland or go to wherever. You don't want to do that. So I think it's important that we stay locked in. And when it comes playoffs, I think, as you said, the ball movement is definitely going to be a big one. And the defense, of course, the defense needs to be better. It needs to be sustainable if we want to win an NBA championship. But yeah, the ball movement is huge. I want to see everybody get involved. I want to see the backdoor cuts of Mikal Bridges, the drives and the kickouts and the 1 pass, 2 pass, knock down an open 3. I need to see that happen. This team just needs to execute. They need to execute. You have the talent. Let's execute. Let's get to a conference final. Let's face Detroit in the conference final. Let's make it to the finals, man. This team is clearly right now the most talented roster in the East, but they've had trouble the past 2 years with really putting it together. And that's what I need to see in the playoffs. They need to execute. They need to play in-your-face defense, move the ball around, hit open shots, because I think this team has also struggled with that this season and even last season. They don't hit their open shots sometimes. We saw it last night against Indiana. We had multiple open shots, from behind the arc where this team just misses it. So the biggest thing for me when it comes to, the playoffs is execute. Just execute what you got to do. And that will, help everything else. So yeah, that's all I really have to say. Now, I am confident in this team when it comes to the playoff time. Now, would I be surprised if we lose to I don't know, a Cleveland, Indiana, not Indiana, excuse me, Boston, Detroit? No, it wouldn't shock me because I think this team does have limitations, but I also am pretty confident that we can make it to the finals. It's either, for me at least, I could see this team going to the finals. I could also see this team losing in the 2nd round. I don't really know what they're going to give me, but when they're playing their best, I'm pretty confident that this team can execute. So that's what I got to say.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. We really don't know which version of this team we're going to get on a nightly basis, which I really don't like, because, we had very high expectations for this team coming in, and we thought, honestly, after that start of the year, that we were just going to coast through the regular season. But that's not clearly the case. We're still doing very good, but it's definitely not a bunch of other teams that are just as hungry as they are, that really want to make an impact, make a statement. So the Knicks need to just stay locked in, as you said. And the reason that I heavily emphasize the ball movement is because they do really well every time. I mean, it's pretty obvious when you put it in retrospect, but when you really like dig deeper about it and you think about it more, when the ball is moving more, they're putting up assist numbers, they're not turning it over. The offense looks unstoppable at times. I mean, most of their wins over the course of the past 2 months have come when the team has 25 or more assists. It's just true. So when they are moving the ball well, when they're getting everyone involved, it's not a bunch of hero ball. They end up doing good things. We saw against the Pacers a lot of hero ball from Jalen Brunson. And again, this is not a Jalen final 5 minutes of the fourth quarter in overtime. But, when we have too much hero ball, good things aren't happening. And I understand that they don't have like other shot creators really at the same level as Jalen Brunson. I understand that. But in order for the other guys to actually provide an impact, everyone's got to get involved. So I want to see the ball move more. I know the defense has really tightened up, and I know that's something that we'll always kind of be a little weary about. We'll always wonder if they're going to fall back to kind of what they were at during that slump back in January, if they're going to be that poor defensive team. But I'm confident that if they stay locked in, they can be an elite defensive team. I have firmly said that too, that this group can play defense if they actually try to play defense. When they don't try to play defense like they did against the Pacers, teams make them pay. That's how you end up losing to teams like Dallas or Sacramento or Indiana. Because at the end of the day, these guys are NBA players. The metrics may tell you that they're bad teams, but they're NBA players. You leave NBA players open for shots, they're gonna make them. So you have to stay, like you said, Johnny. They got to stay locked in. They got to stay composed, stay poised, keep a strong mentality, keep everybody on the same page, and just go for it, because I really do think this team is capable of reaching the NBA Finals, and not only reaching the NBA Finals, but winning the NBA Finals. The Oklahoma City Thunder look a little less invincible than we thought they'd be. Now, granted, they're dealing with a ton of injuries right now, but even when they were healthy, you felt like that they can actually be beatable. So if the Knicks are actually composed and they really are, pursuing this title push, they got to stay locked in. It is that simple. Stay locked in on both ends of the floor, and good things will happen. And for the second half of the season, I'm hoping that we see kind of those late season pushes that we tend to see this team do in recent years. They kind of tend to have these moments where mid-season they kind of struggle, and then towards like March, they just gun it. They end up going on big streaks, big wins. They take some big games. They actually stay locked in. That's good leadership right there. So I'm hoping that same trend continues this year into the second half and into the postseason. But I do think this is a good spot about our assessments of this first half, 2/3, whatever you want to call it, in the comment section below, because we would love to hear about it and talk with you guys about all that stuff. You can also follow us on all of our social media platforms. We are on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and of course this YouTube page that you just watched the video on. You can follow me and Johnny's personal Twitter accounts. We will link those in the description down below. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Fireside Knicks, everybody, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out, and let's go Knicks.